The fire alarm screamed through the Grand Joseon Hotel at the exact moment Amara Blake's hands were buried wrist-deep in scalding caramel. Smoke rolled across the kitchen ceiling. Chaos erupted around her, chefs scattering, trays crashing to the floor. And then a man in a tailored black suit shoved through the doors like the building belonged to him, because it did, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her out of the flames a half-second before the gas line behind her caught. He looked down at her, breathing hard, something raw and unguarded flickering across his face before he could stop it. Welcome to Story World, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. 3 days earlier, Amara Blake had landed in Seoul with a suitcase, a pastry certification from Le Cordon Bleu, and exactly $340 to her name. She was 29 from Atlanta, and she had spent the last 6 years working her way up through kitchens that never quite saw her the way she saw herself. When the Grand Joseon Hotel offered her a 3-month contract to help launch their new dessert program for the hotel's centennial gala, she hadn't hesitated. It was the kind of opportunity that came once, if it came at all. The Grand Joseon wasn't just a hotel. It was an institution, marble floors and crystal chandeliers, the kind of place where old soul money and new soul money collided over champagne. It belonged to the Kang family, and it had belonged to them for 3 generations. Kang Min-ho had taken over as chairman 4 years ago, at 31, after his father's sudden stroke, and in that time he had turned a fatting luxury brand into the most talked-about hospitality empire in Asia. He was 35 now. He was also, according to every tabloid in the country, incapable of smiling. Amara had heard the rumors before she ever laid eyes on him. The staff spoke about him in careful, lowered voices, the way people talk about weather systems. Chairman Kang doesn't raise his voice. Chairman Kang doesn't forgive mistakes. Chairman Kang has not taken a single day off in 4 years. She pictured someone hollow marble all the way through like the floors he walked on. She met him on her second day in the kitchen when he walked through unannounced to inspect the gala menu. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. The entire kitchen went silent the moment he entered, 40 people finding something urgent to do with their hands. Amara, elbow-deep in tempered chocolate and unaware of hierarchy she hadn't yet learned, looked up and said, "You're blocking my light." The room froze. Somewhere behind her, the head pastry chef made a small, strangled sound. Kang Min-ho looked at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he stepped 2 feet to the left. That was the whole interaction. It shouldn't have meant anything. But that night, lying in the tiny staff apartment the hotel had assigned her, Amara found herself replaying it, the flicker of something in his eyes that hadn't matched the ice in his expression. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself a lot of things over the following 2 weeks that turned out not to be true. He started appearing in the kitchen more often. Not obviously, not in any way the staff would have flagged as unusual for a chairman overseeing a centennial gala, but Amara noticed. He noticed the trial desserts she left on the counter for testing. He noticed when she skipped lunch. On the 9th day, a container of soup appeared beside her station at 2 in the afternoon, no note, no explanation. She asked the sous chef who left it. He shrugged and looked pointedly toward the door where Min-ho had exited 30 seconds earlier. She told herself that was nothing, too. The Centennial Gala was 2 weeks away when the investor dinner happened. The Grand Joseon was courting a partnership with an American hospitality group, and Amara had been asked to prepare the dessert course personally. That was where she met Daniel Everett, the investment group's lead negotiator, 34, charming in the practiced way of men who had been told their whole lives that charm worked. He found her in the hallway afterward, complimented her tarte tatin in a way that lingered too long on the word beautiful, and asked for her number with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no. She hadn't given it to him. She was still finding the polite words to decline when Min-ho appeared at the end of the hallway and something about the air changed. He didn't say anything threatening. He simply walked over, stood beside Amara with the quiet authority of a man used to rooms rearranging themselves around him, and said, "Ms. Blake has a call with the events team. Now." There was no call. They both knew there was no call. Daniel Everett looked between them, recalibrated something behind his eyes, and excused himself with a tight smile. "You didn't have to do that," Amara said once he was gone. "I know," Min-ho said. And then, because it seemed to cost him something to say it, "I didn't like the way he looked at you." She should have laughed it off. Instead, her pulse did something complicated and unfamiliar, and she found herself looking at Kang Min-ho, chairman of the Grand Joseon, a man tabloids described as incapable of smiling, and thinking that maybe they had simply never given him a reason to. If you're new here, this is the part where I tell you to go ahead and hit subscribe, because this story is about to get a lot more complicated, and you do not want to miss what happens next. The rain started the night of the final gala rehearsal, and it did not stop. Seoul had been warned about the storm for days, but nobody had expected the flooding, the power grid failures rolling block by block across the city, the way the hotel's own backup generators would groan and flicker under the strain. Amara was alone in the kitchen at 11 at night, running through the plating sequence one final time when the lights died completely. She heard him before she saw him, footsteps in the dark, steady, unhurried, the way he moved through every room like the ground had been consulted in advance. Amara, he said, and it was the first time he had used her first name. I'm fine, she said, though her voice betrayed her, thin and unsteady in the blackness. Just lost my count on the plating. He found his way to her by instinct or memory, and when his hand found her shoulder in the dark, neither of them pulled away. The emergency lights flickered on a moment later, dim and red, casting the whole kitchen in a strange underwater glow. And in that light, close enough that she could count the rain still clinging to his jacket, Min-ho looked at her the way he had looked at her that very first day, like something in him had been unlocked without his permission. I have spent 4 years, he said quietly, making sure nothing in my life requires anything from me except my judgment, my time, my name. He paused. You require none of those things from me, and somehow you have taken all of them anyway. Min-ho. I am telling you this because if I don't say it now in the dark where I can pretend later that I didn't, I don't think I will ever say it at all. The kitchen was silent except for the rain hammering the windows 2 floors up. Amara's heart was a fist against her ribs. She thought about Daniel Everett's easy charm and how nothing in her had responded to it, and she thought about this man, cold marble to everyone else in Seoul, standing in the dark admitting to a fear she hadn't known powerful men were allowed to have. She reached up and touched his face, and that was answer enough. What happened between them that night was not loud. It was not the kind of thing the tabloids would have had words for even if they'd known. It was the emergency lights and the rain and 2 people who had spent their entire lives being needed by everyone and truly known by almost no one, finally choosing to be known. When Amara woke the next morning in the small hours before the hotel stirred to life, Min-ho was still there, one arm around her, his phone buzzing uselessly on the nightstand with messages neither of them had any intention of answering yet. For 3 days, something like happiness settled over Amara that she didn't entirely trust. She had learned, the hard way back in Atlanta, that happiness this quiet usually came with a bill attached. She just didn't know yet who was going to hand it to her. Her name was Yoo Jae-soo, and she arrived at the Grand Joseon on a Tuesday morning wearing white, which Amara would later think was either a coincidence or a very deliberate insult. Jae-soo had been engaged to Min-ho once years ago before his father's stroke, before the empire fully became his to carry. The engagement had ended quietly, the way these things did among families who valued discretion over drama, but Jae-soo had never quite let go of the idea that the ending had been temporary rather than final. She found Amara in the pastry kitchen, looked her over with the slow, assessing gaze of a woman auditing a stranger's worth, and said, in perfect, unhurried English, "So you're the one making him foolish." Amara didn't look up from her work. "I'm the one making the Centennial Gala desserts. I don't know anything about foolish." He hasn't smiled in 4 years, Jae-soo said. Not once. My mother has dinner with his mother every month and she tells me, not once in 4 years. Do you know what people are saying now? That the ICE chairman was seen laughing in a hallway with the American pastry girl. She said American pastry girl the way some people said something they'd found on the bottom of a shoe. Is there something you need, Ms. Yu? I need you to understand what you're standing in the middle of. Jae-soo's voice dropped, losing its performance, turning almost sincere. Min-ho is not just a man, he's the last Kang who can hold that family together. His board is circling. His mother wants an heir from a family that will strengthen the company, not complicate it. You are a complication, Ms. Blake, a beautiful one I'm sure, but a complication nonetheless. And complications in his world do not survive very long. She left without waiting for a response, the click of her heels echoing down the marble hallway, and Amara stood very still in the kitchen for a long moment, staring at the ganache cooling in front of her without seeing it at all. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself Min-ho wasn't a man who let other people write his story for him. But that night when he came to find her after the board dinner, his jaw tight, his tie already loosened in a way that told her the meeting had gone badly, she asked him directly. Is she right? Am I a complication? Min-ho's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. The board raised concerns today about my judgment, about distraction. He exhaled slowly. I told them my judgment has never been clearer. That's not what I asked. I know what you asked. He crossed the room and took her hands, and his grip was steady even though his voice when it came was not entirely. Amara, I have run this company since I was 31 years old, and in 4 years I have never once wanted something for myself, not once. I wanted the hotel to survive. I wanted my father's name protected. I wanted the board to stop looking for reasons to remove me. I have never simply wanted a person. His thumb traced slow, absent circles over her knuckles. You are not a complication. You are the first thing in 4 years I have wanted that had nothing to do with survival. It should have settled the fear in her chest. Instead, lying awake that night while Min-ho slept beside her, Amara found herself thinking about Jisu's voice low and certain. Complications in his world do not survive very long. She thought about her own mother, who had loved a man the whole town warned her about, and who had ended up alone with a small apartment and a daughter to raise on tips and stubbornness. She thought about how easy it would be to lose herself in a man like Min-ho, and how much harder it would be to find herself again if it ever fell apart. By morning, she had made a decision she would come to regret, though not for the reasons she expected. She left before he woke. She packed the same suitcase she had arrived with 3 weeks earlier, wrote a note she tore up twice before settling on 6 words, I need to protect myself first, and left it on the pillow where his head had been. She told the hotel's HR office she had a family emergency back in Atlanta. It was, she told herself on the taxi ride to Incheon, the responsible thing to do. Leave before the fall got high enough to break something permanent. She made it as far as the departure gate before her phone rang. It was Min-ho's number. It was a Seoul area code she didn't recognize, and something in her gut told her to answer it anyway. Ms. Blake, the voice was calm, professional, and completely unfamiliar. My name is Detective O. I'm calling regarding an incident at the Grand Joseon Hotel involving Chairman Kang. I understand you may have information relevant to an active threat against him. Amara's blood went cold standing at gate 34, her boarding pass still in her hand. What kind of threat? Ma'am, I'd prefer to explain in person. Are you still in Seoul? She looked at the gate agent already scanning boarding passes for her flight. She looked at the suitcase at her feet, packed with everything she owned in this country. And she thought about Min-ho's voice in the dark kitchen, the way he had said, if I don't say it now I don't think I will ever say it at all. And she understood with a clarity that embarrassed her, that she had just done the exact thing she'd told herself she wouldn't. She had run before anything had actually broken. I'm still in Seoul, she said. Tell me where to go. If this story has you sitting up a little straighter, go ahead and drop a comment telling me if you think Amara made the right call getting off that flight, because what she walks into next is about to change everything. Detective O met her in a quiet office 2 floors below the Grand Joseon's main lobby, a room Amara hadn't even known existed, tucked behind an unmarked door near hotel security. He was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 40, with the tired, methodical calm of a man who had spent years reading people for a living. He slid a folder across the table before she'd even sat down. 2 nights ago, someone tampered with the gas line in the pastry kitchen, he said. The same line that failed during the storm rehearsal. Our engineers initially wrote it off as storm damage. It was, someone loosened a coupling by hand, recently. Amara's stomach dropped. The fire, the one during the fundraiser test run. That fire was not an accident, Ms. Blake, and we believe it wasn't meant to damage the kitchen. We believe it was meant to hurt you. The room tilted slightly around her. Why would anyone want to hurt me? Detective O opened the folder further, revealing a series of financial transfers, dates, names she half recognized from hotel paperwork. Because in 3 weeks, Chairman Kang's board will vote on a merger that determines control of 40% of Kang Holdings. There's a faction on that board who believes Chairman Kang's judgment has been, in their words, compromised. They believe if the source of that compromise disappeared, quietly, the chairman would return to being the version of himself they can control. He paused. We traced the payment for the kitchen tampering to an account linked to Yoo Jisu's family holding company. Amara sat very still. She threatened me. She came to the kitchen and told me I was a complication. We're aware. We have reason to believe the sabotage was a warning that was meant to escalate if the warning wasn't heeded. Chairman Kang doesn't know about this yet. We came to you first because our surveillance shows you left for the airport this morning, and we needed to know whether you were leaving because you were frightened or because you'd been threatened directly. Neither, Amara said quietly, and then, more quietly, I was scared of something a lot more ordinary than a bomb threat. Detective O's expression softened just slightly. Ms. Blake, I would strongly recommend you not return to your apartment alone tonight, and I would recommend Chairman Kang hear this from you before he hears it from us. She found him in his office on the top floor, the one with the wall of glass overlooking Seoul, standing exactly where she imagined he'd been standing every night since she left, though it had only been hours. He turned when the door opened, and the look on his face when he saw her, relief and fury and disbelief all fighting for the same expression, told her everything about what those hours had cost him. "You left," he said, and his voice was rougher than she'd ever heard it. "I came back." "You left, Amara. I woke up and you were gone, and I have spent the entire morning telling myself that I understood, that I wasn't going to be the man who chased a woman across an airport like it was a drama. And then Detective O called me 20 minutes ago and told me someone tried to kill you in my own kitchen. And I have never in my life wanted to burn something to the ground the way I want to right now." "Min-ho." "Jai-soo," he said, and the name came out of him like something toxic. "She sabotaged a gas line in my hotel to hurt you." He crossed the room, and when he took her face in his hands, his own were not entirely steady. "Do you understand what I am now going to do to protect you? I don't want you to do anything reckless. I have spent 4 years being careful, Amara. Careful with the board, careful with the company, careful with my own name. I am done being careful with the one thing that actually matters." He pressed his forehead to hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke, just breathed the same air in the quiet of his office while Seoul glittered on the other side of the glass. "I am not going to lose you to a fire someone else started, because I was too slow to say what I should have said weeks ago." That evening, Min-ho called an emergency session of the board. And for the first time in 4 years, Kang Min-ho raised his voice in a room full of powerful men who had built careers on believing he never would. He laid out the evidence Detective O had gathered, the falsified maintenance logs, the transferred funds, the security footage of a woman in a pale coat entering the kitchen corridor at an hour she had no authorization to be there. He watched Yoo Jae-soo's father, a man who sat on the board through decades of inherited influence, go the color of old paper as the footage played. "My family has done business with the Yoo family for 3 generations," Min-ho said, his voice carrying without needing to rise. "That business ends tonight, and if any member of this board believes my judgment is compromised because I refuse to let a woman I love be treated as collateral damage in a corporate maneuver, I invite you to bring that motion to a vote. I will win it, and I will remember very clearly who stood against me." Nobody brought the motion. By the end of the week, Yoo Jae-soo's family had quietly withdrawn from every joint venture connected to Kang Holdings, and criminal charges for the sabotage were moving forward with a speed that only happened when powerful people decided to stop protecting each other. The Centennial Gala went ahead as planned. 10 days later, under chandeliers polished to a blinding shine, the storm long past, the kitchen fully repaired. Amara's dessert course was, by every account that mattered, the most talked-about part of the entire evening. Delicate towers of dark chocolate and passion fruit that guests photographed before they would even let themselves take a bite. She stood near the kitchen doors in her whites, watching the ballroom she had once felt so out of place in, and did not notice Min-ho approaching until he was already beside her. "You're supposed to be circulating with the investors," she said. "I circulated enough for one lifetime this week." He took her hand, and instead of leading her toward the crowd, he led her toward the small side terrace overlooking the Han River, away from the noise, away from the cameras that had spent the last 10 days documenting the ICE chairman's sudden, inexplicable habit of smiling. "I have a question for you," he said, once they were alone under the string lights. "And I would like you to answer it without running to any airports afterward." Amara laughed despite herself, despite the tears already gathering. "I think I can manage that." He reached into his jacket and produced a small black box. And his hands, so steady in every boardroom she'd ever watched him command, trembled slightly as he opened it. "I told you once that I had never simply wanted a person. I want to correct that. I want you, Amara Blake, not the version of you that fits neatly into my world, not a version that protects herself first. All of you, for the rest of however long I'm lucky enough to have." He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Kang Min-ho, feared by boardrooms and tabloids alike, looked entirely, helplessly unguarded. "Marry me." She said yes before he'd even finished lifting the ring from the box, and when he kissed her on that terrace, the city glittering below them and the gala's music drifting faintly through the doors, neither of them noticed the small crowd of guests who had gathered at the windows to watch, phones raised, capturing the moment the ICE chairman finally, publicly thawed. They were married the following spring, in a garden ceremony neither of their families had fully expected but both had in the end fully embraced. Amara's mother flew in from Atlanta and cried through the entire vows, telling anyone who would listen that she had always known her daughter would end up somewhere extraordinary. She just hadn't expected extraordinary to come with a translator. Detective O sent a card. Even the hotel staff, the same 40 people who had once frozen the moment Chairman Kang walked into a kitchen, stood and cheered when Amara threw her bouquet. A year later, Amara stood in the same pastry kitchen where it had all begun, one hand resting on the small, unmistakable curve of her stomach, watching the afternoon light pour gold across the counters. Min-ho found her there, the way he always did, drawn to whatever room she occupied like it was the only room in the building that mattered. "You're supposed to be resting," he said, though there was no real command in it anymore, just the low, warm affection that had replaced the ice the tabloids had spent years writing about. "I'm testing a new recipe," she said. "For someone very small who's going to have very particular opinions about dessert, I suspect."